side to row to center. Lundvik shoots. He scores! Johnny Lundvik does it again!
Jarvis in close shot. There's a goal. Seth Jarvis, the 17-year-old, short side, glove side, high, just under the crossbar.
Cutting to the front of the net, and they score. Reese Newkirk along the right wing just took the pass. That was phenomenal patience from Seth Jarvis and the Winterhawks.
Hey, this is Reese Newkirk, and you're listening to the Pucklandia podcast.
Welcome into the new and improved version of Pucklandia. This is our season debut, and so I wanted to go to one of our favorite guests, more or less a co-host, Josh Critzer. It's kind of like it's football season. Like a good tight end is your security blanket. Josh, you kind of exist as that that service for this show. Well, first off, how's the off season?
Yeah, it's been a time, that's for sure. I kind of this is kind of the safety school, right? Like we all kind of had those back to kind of the college days, right? But leave it to me for my opening remarks to get a NCAA thing in there, but that's just fine. But anyway, no, it's been good, Chad. It's been a very eventful off season for me, but glad to be back with hockey here, and it's crazy that there's already a weekend down in the WHL. How was the off season for you?
No, like you mentioned, busy. Lots of motorcycles. Just went to a couple of football games here recently. In Lincoln and Kansas City, Missouri. They were both fun trip, and so part of that then has gotten in the way of this show, and I apologize to the listeners, hungry for new content, but and then if you're listening to this, then that we're on a new independent platform, which was kind of a little sad to see the transition from Dub Network, but I felt like it was time to wise man once said, I'm on a roll, it's time to go solo. So here we are, and and for listeners that aren't familiar, and even if we are, let's touch on your media organization there, Josh. I know it's like anywhere else, staffing levels are tough, right? But how are things going with Hockey PNW?
Yeah, it's been good. We kind of, like you mentioned, had some staffing challenges, myself included, just with the old day job stuff, and so we've kind of had to kind of transition PNW Hockey Talk a little bit from focused on the entire U.S. division to just kind of focused on Portland. We had a couple other guys who didn't quite have the time, and life kind of gets in the way a little bit. I know Brandon Rivers has got some aspirations, who's been a frequent guest on this show. Fans are very familiar with his voice and his work. He'll kind of be stepping in here and there as he's got time, but if there's major stuff that goes on in the division, we'll do our best to cover it, but for the most part, we are trying to focus on the Portland side right now. Maybe as things move along, we'll be able to kind of expand back out again, but overall, I've been very pleased with how PNW Hockey Talk has gone. We've been able to, remain credentialed and all those things, which is definitely something that I was a little nervous about over the off season, but was able to kind of retain all of those to be able to continue to cover the league here this year. So trying not to peel back the curtain a little too much there, but very excited to be able to kind of come on for this next year, and trying to kind of mix things up a little bit, trying a few new things this year, and we'll just kind of see how it goes. It's what do you say, Chad? It's a developmental league for everybody, and that includes the media members who do our best to try and cover these teams and players that the fans and listeners love to follow.
Yeah. You mentioned the peeling the curtain back a little bit, and that's kind of our differences in paths. That I'm not credentialed. I still pay money to get in the door and wear a jersey and all that. But at the same time, I gotta also be careful not to piss anybody's Cheerios, which is usually why I don't end up doing a season recap, because it's usually, the what's the phrase, the nerves a little close to the skin, and it's just been so frustrating, having the way that the playoffs come to a close here in this town over the last few years. Although I should be just happy to have playoffs at all, I suppose. But so sometimes I skip the recap because I'm like, I'm just gonna piss everybody off anyway and not be able to get any guests. So just kind of set it aside.
Yeah, it's always a fine line and an interesting dynamic trying to walk that, especially when it's people that and players that you've talked to, or you've invested 6-7 months with some of these, and for some players you've invested years, and it's can sometimes be a challenge to walk that line. But these players know what they're signing up for when they come to this league. It's like we touched on. It's a developmental league, and part of that is kind of getting used to maybe some of the criticism that can come about. But that's just always an interesting line that you have to try and walk between, criticizing versus attacking versus hey, I don't think anyone was out there not doing their best type of thing either. So yeah, but I totally hear where you're coming from.
No, I'm rarely critical of the players. It's more the guys that I'm hoping to get on the show later on. It's the way I kind of dance around it, but
Sure.
I think that's really the value of this show, and guests like yourself, and my sister show WHL Unfiltered, which you'll be seeing, and they're sharing a feed now. They're roommates, and so that there's a lot of authenticity on this side of the microphone, and also with all of our guests. I think about that sometimes. You see, like, obviously it wouldn't work in our league, in our ecosystem, but you look at, like, some of these guys on afternoons on sports talk radio with just throwing out hot takes or whatever, and they don't believe any of it. It's just to try to create controversy or whatever, and like that's just not how it works around here. Like, authenticity and being who we are is really kind of the calling card of a show like this.
100%. Couldn't agree with you more on that one. Like, we want to be right. We want to be honest. We want to, we're going to give our opinions, but at the same time, we're not just, we try not to speculate too much, right? There's a certain element of that goes into covering a team, but at the same time, you want to be respectful, and, we're not trying to, make any headlines or get anybody in trouble.
Yeah. So, typically we would have done a season preview show, or maybe even a couple of them, but we didn't see each other much at training camp, but kind of said hi, and but it's kind of, we talked off air a little bit. It's kind of cheating that we're going to do our preview after watching a couple of games and seeing how things are maybe going to play out, and a couple guys coming back. So it's a little bit less of a guessing game at this point. Although two games in isn't much of a sample size, but kind of what are your broad brush expectations out of this Winterhawks team this year, Josh?
I think it's an interesting year for Portland. They, around this town, it's not rebuild, it's reload, and this team is going to look a little different than teams of the past. And fans started to kind of get a glimpse of that last year with not really any super high NHL drafted guys. There isn't the Niederreiters or the Jones or the Jarvis or Glass for more recent, right? Like, there isn't that first round pick bona fide superstar on this team, and it's kind of a sum of the parts type of thing, and they want to rely on their depth as opposed to trying to be top heavy. And we'll start to see, as lines start to kind of formalize a little bit, and you see some guys that are expected to take a bigger role on. And I'm sure we'll get to the Prince Albert native guy who may or may not have 6 goals in 2 games, but we'll get to him, I imagine. But there's guys who are going to need to take on a bigger role. I think there's also some question marks around the overage situation. Should Tyson Kozak come back? By all indications, he's not going to, but you never know with how some of these prospects work. You also just don't know, what Mike Johnson's got, kind of up his sleeve. There also is still a lot of work to be done on the number of defensemen. I believe last I looked, there's still 10 on the active roster. So there's likely going to be some either reassignments coming or a trade that you're just not going to carry 10 defensemen on the roster. So there's a lot of moving parts this early in the season, but I think Portland is once again going to be competing for, one of the top, 4 spots in the conference. And I don't think that's, being too much of a homer, as with the team that I cover. But I do think they're going to be kind of right there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I wasn't joking when I said I needed to see a couple of games before I could get a feel for where they were going to go. I mean, you're correct in that. I'm sure it's obvious to anybody that there isn't a lot of star power on this team right now, or at least that's what I thought before. By God, that's Gabe Clausen's music. I mean, obviously it's not sustainable to score 3 goals a game over the course of the year. I mean, and people joke about that one, after one game, they're going to go 68-0 or on pace, whatever. And I let that one lie, but once it's 2 games in, okay, now you have my interest. Now I can, start putting this, 210 goal average out there or whatever it is like that. Then that's kind of fun, but we'll see how that goes. But if Clausen can, stay hot, he's going to stay that hot. But if he can be consistent over the course of the year, then that'll plug a lot of gaps as far as some of these guys that are moving on to the pros.
Yeah, and Portland lost a lot of offense. They lost a lot of kind of their kind of key drivers, I guess you could say. But I think that's going to be the case for a lot of teams, right? Like that's just kind of the way things go. And in junior hockey, there's going to be that turnover, and your 18s become your 19s, and your 19s help you win in this league. And Gabe Clausen is a former first round pick, 19th overall in 2018. So he's the type of player who is maybe kind of coming on a little bit later in his development, but my goodness, he looked good those first 2 games, and he was scored. He scored a penalty shot, a shorthanded goal, even strength, right? Like he's kind of doing it all in a bunch of different areas. But as impressed as I was with his 6 goals, which obviously it's hard not to be impressed, especially with 4 in that Kelowna game. But he's also just out there, killing penalties, taking faceoffs, doing all the little things too. And Mike Johnson always likes to have his centers play a real kind of pivotal role and ask them to do a lot and not just be scorers. And Gabe Clausen is off to a good start. And I think 3 of Portland's centers right now have multiple points in the first 2 games. So and kind of you're going to go as far as some of these guys. What elevation can we see out of Jack O'Brien? He's got 3 assists in the first 2 games. He was a player who really came on in his 16-year-old year, playing on a line with Jarvis and Giroux, and 17-year thing just kind of happened, right? And 18-year-old year maybe didn't quite go how he would have preferred, but those are the types of players that you look at to kind of take that next step. And right now, through 2 games, Gabe Clausen and Jack O'Brien have come to play.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I've mentioned on this show probably 100 times, but seeing, I don't remember what the event even was, but seeing Mike Johnson in the off season and comparing junior hockey to a book he was reading about bamboo. I think it was bamboo, and you water it for the first year and nothing happens, and the second year nothing happens, and then the third year it grows like 100 feet or whatever. I don't remember the numbers, but it was something like that you're planting these seeds, and you invested ice time in a 16-year-old Jack O'Brien to get goals this year, and so that'll be interesting to see. And yeah, there's a lot of guys, I mean, across the league that, we had a couple years that were weird there. We're probably all sick of talking about it, but and a lack of playoffs and only, 24 games that one year and all that. And so, now that we're kind of getting back on track, it'll see, bigger, faster, stronger, some of these guys. I mean, that's junior hockey every year. It's, you're banking on your 19s to really make hay for you. And, if your last 2 years didn't go the way you wanted to, well, that's fine. You can still make up for it now. And so that'll be, and teams at this level that are good, that's what happens. These guys, kind of start, paying dividends for you, in their final 2 years in this league.
100%. And, we kind of touched on, guys that kind of move on, right? They, if Kozak doesn't come back, it's 90 goals that are missing. It's 295 points, right? You also lose the goalie of the year in Taylor Gauthier. Don Hay, kind of the defensive-minded coach, goes back to Kamloops, right? Like, you have kind of this exodus that's happened, and you get some familiar faces coming back in with Kyle Gustafson, who this will be his 19th year in Portland. But, some of these other guys, it's an opportunity to see, what can Kyle Szaszowski do? What type of step can we see from Luke Shelter and some of those other guys who were kind of in the bottom six last year, who are going to move up into the middle six, and some of the middle six who move forward is, it can all kind of, it's all, how does someone develop from year over year, and how do they do it with that ice time? And Gabe Clausen is someone who's put on weight every offseason and put on muscle, and you saw it in those two games. He's not getting knocked off the puck nearly as easily as he was maybe as a 16 or a 17, and that's the type of progression that you're hoping to see guys take. And like you said, it's a very small sample size, if you can even call it that, but there's a lot to like in kind of those first two games, albeit Kamloops was playing without basically their entire top six, but so it's hard to really judge that game for sure. But Portland did what they needed to do in that game, and that's what good teams do. They don't care who's lined up across from them. They're going to go out and try and get their 2 points, and 2 points in September means the same as 2 points in March and February, and at the end of the season, and Portland's already got 4 of them banked.
Well, and yeah, Kamloops had a lot of guys away at pro camp, as a good team is going to do, this time of year. But it wasn't like the Winterhawks were at full strength either. I mean, they were short 5 guys that were away.
3 for sure. It was 3 with Ulsher, McCleary, and Stefan.
Yeah. I mean,
because Spoonar was back from Edmonton in time. He was backing up both games. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess I could have done the research on that, but I thought it was 5. But either way, I mean, you're still short. That's a significant portion of your contributors too, especially on the back end. So.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it wasn't like it was David versus Goliath. That in that regard. I mean, and they still. Made their opportunities count. Played real well for 40 minutes and well enough to hang on through the final 20 in that Kamloops game.
Totally agree. And Mike Johnson said in his press conferences after both games about hey, it's we want to get these wins, but it's about getting our team to play the way we want to, and he said they're very far from the team that he wants them to be, and that's to be expected. And they're working guys into the lineup, right? He was trying to get some guys in who maybe didn't get a chance to play in the preseason, like Gabe Clausen didn't play a single game in the preseason, came right in and did what he did. But there's a couple guys who kind of rotated in and out for one another to kind of get an opportunity to play a little bit. So there's it's a long season. It's you get into the grind, and you got to take advantage of these points when they're available. And there's going to be growing pains. Look at how Portland started last year, and they looked like they might not even be a 500 hockey team. And they we're 1 point off from winning the division. So, these early parts of the season is all about learning. It's about coaching. It's about getting some of the young players to gain some confidence. They may have been the best player on their team for their entire life, and now they're playing fourth line or third line minutes, if for third D pair minutes. So there's going to be some adjustments, and this is an opportunity for guys to kind of show what they can do, and also kind of demonstrate a little bit of patience as well.
Yeah, I mean, Portland's kind of always started out slow. I mean, you think about the Jamie Compon era, starting out 1-9 and those kinds of things, and it seems like if they can, this year, well, they're not going to start out 0 and anything, because they won the first couple, but so they can, and your point stands that anytime you can pick up a couple wins early on, like that's just as good as picking up late. One thing I thought about over the weekend, and the contrast of a 3-0 shutout and then going 5-5 in overtime and picking up the overtime winner, like that kind of encompasses the career of Giannuzzi of his time here. I mean, you kind of in some nights, he'll put up a shutout, and then I make a Grant Fuhr comparison or goalie coach Andy Moog when he played in that era. That it doesn't matter if you give up 5, you just got to score 6, and then that's and they can pull that out, and so then it's kind of those are almost more of a gritty gutsy kind of a win than the clean slate, and so that's it's interesting to see him battle through that. I mean, it's kind of what we've seen throughout with the 20-year-old.
Yeah, and he gave up 5 goals. How many of those were entirely on him, where you look at the goalie and go, he probably should have had that, right? Like, there's a couple that you just don't know, and it's hard to tell like how much of it is defensive assignment or something that got missed here or there. But I think there was also, like, in a game like that, there's goals that are going in it. You could just tell it's like, okay, this is a junior hockey kind of night, and that's what we were seeing that in that Kelowna game. But what kind of stood out to me was, he kind of shut the door there once it got to the 5th, right? If a 6th goes in, it's over, right? Like, he locked it down. There were some other opportunities, and he was able to, kind of stop the bleeding there and allowed his team to get the 6th, right? And to get the winner in overtime and all that. So there's a couple of times too throughout the weekend where you saw him make a big save and Portland went down and scored shortly thereafter. And, sometimes, it's not the number of saves you make, it's when you make them. Obviously, still the final number counts, right? But there was some times where, the game could have really broken open, or, and there's going to be nights like that there is for everybody, right? And, but, Giannuzzi's he's been with Portland for a long time now, so he's faced his share of adversity, and he's ready to kind of own the net. And through the first 2 games, he's played all right, and he's done what he's needed to do to help his team, get 4 points.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're definitely driving the same point there, as far as again making a reference to the goalies of the 80s. That you can as long as you don't give up that next one, that's all we ask out of you. And I think back to that stretch over Christmas when he was the only available goalie, and those games were definitely like that. As far as shut out the one night, and you're just hanging on by this, hanging on with everything you got the next night, and they pulled out that one too. So it just kind of it seems like we kind of picked up right where we left off as far as that goes. Just kind of just battling and whatever it takes, and some of them are going to be prettier than others, but both cases, 2 points. So.
Yep, absolutely. One of the guys, not to kind of steer the ship a little bit, but I'd be curious what your impressions were of Carter Southern. To me, he was the player of all the rookies that played in the first 2 games, who looked, I think, the most confident, the most poised. I really noticed him at the Neely Cup during training camp, and you could just kind of tell that this was a player who, is coming in, at 17, right, as opposed to coming in at 16, and kind of that extra year of development and kind of that opportunity to kind of grow a little bit may have benefited this guy, and he absolutely looks the part. He was paired with Cagnoni for a big chunk of time, and we all know how dynamic of a player Cagnoni is and is going to be. But I'd be curious what you thought of Carter Sutherland, new guy number 59 for the Winterhawks.
Well, I gotta, what's the phrase I want to use? Pull the chute on this one. I mean, honestly, Clausen kind of took all the oxygen out of the room for me.
Sure.
And it's hard for me to get a good feel on video without knowing the player first.
Sure.
And so that's somebody I'm definitely going to have my eye on here Saturday night, back in the old Glass Palace. But I got to take a rain check on my evaluation at the moment. But, as far as anybody else looking out on paper, I mean, 3 assists in the first 2 games, in the league. Well, let's, we did that treatment for the goal scorer. Let's extrapolate that out. You know what I mean? As far as that's,
right.
100 assists on the year. Like, yeah, I'll take it. You know what I mean? And so, and as you mentioned, Cagnoni. I mean, that's a guy that, I listened to, the Dirk Johnson and had Merrick on his show. And that's a guy that they mentioned, isn't getting a lot of draft talk at this point of the year, but he probably will be. I know some of the guys that follow the league, pretty close out here or have been high on him, since day one. So, if that does stick as a pairing, I mean, that's, I wonder if are there enough pucks on the ice? Is that kind of becomes a question, right?
It does kind of become a question, and but. And someone who plays with Luka, how many times did we see in those first 2 games? It's like, oh, there's Luka behind the net. Like, okay, like you're gonna have to be a little bit more defensively responsible. But then at the same time, you look at it like Luka carries the puck up the ice. He goes, kind of the coast to coast a little bit and throws a backhanded pass, and Portland's got a 3-on-1 down low, and he's feeding it to Southern right there in the slot before Clausen gets his next goal, and you kind of look at it and go, okay, like you kind of got 2 guys that are not afraid to jump into the play. That's very much Mike Johnson's style. He wants his defenseman to activate and not be afraid to jump into the rush. But talk about no fear. Just you had, I think that was even in a 4-on-4 situation, if I'm remembering my goals right. But it was, you just look at some of these young players' ability, and Southern gives the Winterhawks some size back there. I think they've got him listed at 6'4", like right around 200, if I'm remembering right. I don't have the roster in front of me at the moment, but that's what I recall him being. But I also know that people who listen to this show know my love for right shot defensemen, and Southern is another one of those guys who can shoot right-handed, and that can kind of give you some additional options. And he took advantage of Ulsher and McCleary being away, and at their camps, and he certainly looked the part to me. I was trying to keep an eye on some of the rookies to see how they looked, just because of, hey, first couple games, what are the jitters going to be like? What type of player are they? You had an opportunity to kind of flag them a little bit in Neely Cup, but not quite as much. And so that was kind of my focus the first 2 games of, okay, I'm going to obviously cover the game and see the major storylines, but I also want to kind of see how some of these younger guys and rookies play. So at least for me, that was a player who really kind of turned some heads, that a lot of these guys are names that you hear a couple of years ago in the draft, and then you hear about him get signed, and you may have seen him at a Neely Cup, and it's been hard the past couple of years for all the obvious reasons, but then you start seeing him on the ice, and you're like, okay, yeah, I can see what the scouts saw in this guy, or I can see what Johnson saw. And, again, 2 games in, so we want to pump the brakes a little bit, but well on his way to, and had a great start to his WHL career.
Well, I'm going to go the other way. Instead of pumping the brakes and throw gas on that fire. I mean, you're right. He's listed at 6'4", 200 or 204 or something.
Yeah,
I already closed it. And at a point a game, 2 games in, he's already on lists. He's moved up around. I mean, I mean, it's hard for guys to fill out. At this age. At 17, he's already 200 pounds. Like, yeah, he could coast the rest of the year, and somebody's taking him. I mean, it's so hard. I mean, I always, I joke on these shows all the time about, like, that's why they don't let me draft, because if there's 7 rounds, I'm taking 7 defensemen, and we'll figure the rest of it out later. Like, because they're that hard to find and that valuable when you find, good ones, which is, right. Something that we've been treated to here in this town for. Well, certainly the entire MJ era. That's for sure, and we got a couple good ones here coming up right now at the various stages of their Winterhawks careers.
Absolutely, I am really excited to see how Marek Alscher looks. We had an opportunity to see him play just a couple of games at Neely Cup, and then he was off for preseason, and so I'm real excited to kind of see the development that he's taken. He's had an opportunity to play kind of some. Played some summer hockey for Czechia, along with Spunar in the 5 nations, the 4 nations. I can't remember which one they were part of anymore. That all those tournaments kind of run together. But he supposedly has put on some muscle and some weight, and sounds like he's even got a little more offense to his game now. I think playing with Cagnoni a little bit last year kind of maybe helped open some eyes for him. But I'm real excited to see how he and McCleary look after coming back from their NHL camps. Look at the confidence Clausen had coming back, and he talked about, just when I had a chance to talk to him over the phone after the I talked to him after the Kamloops game, and just real briefly after the Kelowna one. But after the Kamloops game, he said that he was at Colorado's rookie camp and development camp, and was saying just seeing what that next level is like was so critical for him, and he realized that, hey, I can play my game, and I can see what I need to do to get there, and then to kind of come back down a couple levels to, like, okay, I was over here, I knew what I could do, I could still do this, now let's come back here and dominate. And that's kind of what you want to see. And so I'm hopeful to see kind of the same thing from McCleary and Alscher, and kind of see what type of confidence they're bringing back to their game, along with James Stefan as well, who we know can absolutely light the lamp, and Portland will absolutely welcome him back to their lineup with flying colors as they try and get a little more depth up front in terms of spreading out the offensive production.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned going to Avalanche camp, and obviously they're doing something right now, and it's hypothetically possible that one of these guys at this age would have played against Bowen Byram,
right.
in this league, and then and then you're doing the typical in training camp stuff, and then maybe you run into the Stanley Cup at the Rockies game or whatever. I mean, it's like it has to be a pretty valuable experience. I mean, the other 31 teams, have a lot of positives too, but not running the Stanley Cup after work. You know what I mean? Like that's got to
right.
be a pretty valuable experience in itself.
Yeah, totally agree with you there.
So, again, we talked off air a little bit too. Like when this show started in the 2014 season, it was kind of intended to be. Well, I didn't know it was going to be the longest running and most downloaded Winterhawks centric show in the history of hockey, and we've achieved that thanks to you, the listener. But anyway, we talked about how this show was always intended to recap the games we just saw and look forward to the upcoming weekend. So maybe we can shift towards that. I mean, you talk to Mike Johnson on a somewhat regular basis. I mean, I've heard it theorized that this is the kind of schedule that he really likes, as far as, the opening weekend on the road, then there's a game, then there's another game. You have, kind of a quiet week here, and then in the next week too, that you can really spend a lot of time in practice and drills and working on systems, before the games start picking up in the schedule. I mean, is that kind of an accurate assessment on your take on the way MJ likes to run the show?
Yeah, he does like to start on the road, and kind of get that team bonding experience. And I know Portland was able to do a couple of things there on the road, and try and kind of build some of that chemistry early. And practice time is very valuable right now. And so, only playing 2 to start, and then only 1 game this weekend is, fits right into kind of what he's looking for. I think the only part of the schedule that maybe isn't exactly to his liking is when kind of the return of the East trip, right? He usually likes to do that early in the year, and this time it's not till after the Christmas break that they're going to do that. So I know he usually likes to, for similar reasons, try and kind of build that team chemistry and kind of get some of that travel out of the way, and maybe a little bit before some of the kind of the snow and wintry conditions start taking place there up in Canada. But yeah, for the most part, I think this is how he would like his schedule to be. If Kamloops is going to be a force. We know that, with them holding the Memorial Cup, and their roster is going to look very different today than it will come January 10th at the trade deadline. There could be a huge number of players that are not on the team, and there's the old saying, it's not who you play, it's when you play them. And Portland's already gotten one of their games out of the way against Kamloops, and then they get a familiar foe in Tri-City coming here this weekend, and then for the first time in a while, we're going to get a chance to see a team that's not from out west here, and get a chance to see Medicine Hat here in about 2 weeks. So I do think this is how Portland would like to start, and if they can go 3 wins in 2 weeks, I think that's something that will help them down the road, especially as they're by all signs, Seattle's going to be a real challenge here in the Western Conference.
Yeah, the home opener against Tri-City, which seems like that's been common for them. I mean, I'm really excited to see what Marc Lajoie does this year. I mean, we talked about some guys on this Winterhawks team that, were pretty, highly regarded coming in as 16s, and maybe haven't, performed up to what they would like or we would like them to. And I'm really excited to see what Lajoie does. I mean, again, it's easy to fall in love with that size, and so, now what are you going to do with it? And I know a lot of the AMS fans are really, really high on that goalie they have, that import. And so it'll be fun to kind of see how those things shake out. Those are a couple guys I'm keeping my eye on.
Yeah, Tri-City's got, they're in their rebuild, right? And that's, to be expected with kind of how the junior hockey cycle goes. And like you mentioned, they've got some exciting players. The couple that you touched on, kind of 2 guys that I'm excited to see are, Dragicevic. He was a real high pick, and then Jordan Gavin, who was, I believe, the 2nd overall pick in kind of this most recent, or I guess not even most recent draft, because that would be the 15-year-olds. But he's a 16-year-old forward. I think he's already got a couple points. I think he picked up 2 assists last weekend, if I'm remembering right. But he's a really talented player. Got a cup of coffee last year, and I'm not sure if they're going to have Parker Bell back yet or not. When I looked this afternoon, he was still on the Calgary Flames roster. I know they've started to send back some of their junior players. Lucas Siona was returned back to Seattle, so I'm not sure if Parker Bell is going to be back, but that would be a big lift for Tri-City if they're able to get Bell back in the lineup. He was a 5th round pick of Calgary in this most recent NHL draft. So they've got some horses. They've got some real good players. and they're not going to be. I think they're going to take a big step from where they were last year. How well can they compete in the division? I think that's still kind of to be determined at this point. But there's a lot of players on that roster that are at least exciting to watch. And again, I'd agree with you that Marc Lajoie is definitely someone who's he got an opportunity in pro camp as well. So and I think he's going to captain the team this year if I remember right. So couple guys to really look forward to watching if you're keeping an eye on the opponent this weekend as well.
I don't. I apologize to the player that I'm trying to pump his tires right now, and I don't remember if we're going with Jean or Jean, but Dwayne Jean Jr. I mean, the First Nations kid. He's got the flow. I mean, I think a lot of folks are really excited to see what he does this year. He's got a lot of flash to his game, and that could translate to some excitement, I think.
Yeah, he's kind of he's done really well in shootouts as well. So it'll be interesting to see if Tri-City's taken Portland over the last couple of years to several shootouts, and Dwayne Jean Jr. or however we're going to pronounce his name. We apologize to him if we're saying it wrong, but he's definitely someone to keep an eye on if it does require the skills competition, because he's got quite the offensive moves, and that the hands are good and tight.
Yeah, and then the week after that, Medicine Hat, and that's again we've talked about it. We didn't have the East-West crossover for a couple of years, and a good buddy of mine that I go to games with listens to the show, and he's from Med Hat, and so that's always a fun one, to have that rivalry game. And sadly, it'll be the first game in Tigers history here in Portland without Bob Ridley at the mic. Friend of the show, Bob Ridley, and so that's all things coming to an end there. But I'm pretty excited to see what Medicine Hat brings to the table.
Yeah, and Medicine Hat, they had a real struggle last year. They were not a good team last year, but there's a couple of players that Portland fans are going to want to keep an eye on, and one of them is the younger brother of Cross Hannes, Crew Hannes. He's bringing back one of your famous sayings, not the Minnesotan, the Texan, which I'm sad that bit is now over. But Crew Hannes is going to be a good player for Medicine Hat, and is up there. So he wears number 20 for Medicine Hat, and they've got a couple other really strong players just due to the fact that they've had some high draft picks. Again, they're going to be kind of like Tri-City, where they're going to have some real younger players, but it's not going to be a complete cakewalk, I don't think, by any means. But they've definitely got some high end talent that will be fun to watch come through the VMC.
Yeah, and then we're not trying to go. Well, we can do whatever we want on this show, I guess, but we're not trying to go all the way down the schedule. But in the Spokane game, that's a quick turnaround to get up to Spokane the next night for the Sunday night game.
Yep.
But they they got a obviously rivalry game. They got that good goalie. They just got back from pro camp, and that'll be exciting. But the one I'm kind of looking at is the Edmonton game. Back to old rivalry, friends of ours. Excited to see them come to town. If you're listening to the show, I guess you're obviously listening to the show. If you're interested in hearing from the general manager of the Edmonton Oil Kings, he's currently scheduled to be on our sister show, WHL Unfiltered, and he's been a good guest on there in the past. Last few times I've had him on, and God, it seems like Kurt Hill's done nothing but everything he touches turns to gold since he's been up there at Edmonton. And so I'm sure he loves coming on my show because I just pump his tires the whole time. But he's got it coming because he's done a dynamite job with the Oil Kings. And to start Unfiltered season, I was like, well, let's talk to last year's champions. And so they they're gracious enough to give me their GM. But Josh, you missed out on those Edmonton series, right?
Yep, I was still in Minnesota at that point. I got here right after those. I came in during the 15-16 season.
Oh man, yeah, that's a you bought at the wrong time, I suppose.
I did. That I did.
But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're watching some pretty good, whatever the Gophers are doing at the time. I'm sure they were contending, but as they tend to do. But yeah, those, and I'm sure you've heard plenty of stories. But yeah, those Edmonton series, they were so much fun, and to have that, in the big barn, which maybe we'll have hockey in the Moda again someday. Who knows? But yeah, that Edmonton series. I mean, it's not a series. They're just coming. It's a one night stand this time, but you just get to rolls off the tongue at that point. But yeah, I'm excited to see what this rendition of the Oil Kings come to town, and a lot of that's just kind of reminiscent.
Yeah, and they look a lot different this year than they did last year, and they're gonna have to kind of start recouping some of the assets that they gave up. I know they made a lot of moves last year. So, but I don't know about you, but something like this Medicine Hat, Edmonton, some of these teams that are coming in, like I haven't followed them. To me, it's almost been two different leagues the past couple of years. There's just with the no crossover, and then with the 24 game shortened season, and the last time I think Portland did their trip was really early in the year. So it's been a while, and so some of these guys, I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and one of the guys was asking me, like, all right, who do you like in the Central? And I was like, you mean the BC or the US? Like, I don't know. Like, tell me, what do you think about the BC and the US? He's like, I don't know. This is completely foreign to me. And so I'm excited to kind of get back to this one league thing and start to see how does the divisions shake up against one another, and how do some of these teams do when they make their trip across the border. And so I'm real excited for that. But also, real quick, I do want to go back to Spokane for just a second, because similar to Tri-City, they've got in the 2021 draft, they got Berkeley Catton, who was the first overall pick. And so the top two picks in the 2021 draft are in the U.S. division. So again, a lot of young players to like. Former Winterhawks assistant general manager Matt Bardsley is now the new general manager there in Spokane. So you'll see a little bit of kind of a Portland flair a little bit there with Spokane, and they're in the midst of their rebuild. And as much as we were excited to talk about Gabe Clausen and his 6 points, Cooper Gazowski for Spokane, he had 5 points on the weekend, and he's just a 17-year-old. He was their former, I believe, second round pick. If I'm going a lot off memory from previous prep that I've done for some of this. And but yeah, I remember him getting 5 points on the weekend, going, okay, like these are the types of players that can really help speed up those rebuilds. For Spokane, we're talking about Gazowski, but also for Portland, like bringing it back to them, there's some of those players that that you weren't necessarily counting on that can come out, and if they can get hot, they can take on this this increased development with the additional ice time. Look out. And so Spokane's got a couple of guys like that. I still think they're going to be kind of in a fighting with Tri-City, I think, for kind of the fourth and fifth spot in the division. Personally, that's just kind of how I see it, at least right now, until you see some of these other moves and cuts that happen. But yeah, it's just nice to finally start to see at least a little bit of a mixture of teams, and not playing 5 in a row against Spokane, or I think there's still 12 games against Seattle, but it's nice to start to mix in some of these other teams a little bit now.
Yeah, and you mentioned Matt Bardsley, also a friend of the show, and whenever he comes on, I think he has 3 or 4 of the top 10 ever downloads of this show and Unfiltered for whatever reason. He's always a good interview, and I will have to try to make sure to get him on the show in his new role in Spokane. He's always gracious with his time, and I'm appreciative of that. That's one thing that's been nice over the years of doing these shows, is kind of developing some of these relationships and getting to talk to some of these these WHL personalities, whether they be in the booth, or behind the bench, or whatever capacity, or covering the team the way you do, Josh. And I always as much as I have you on all the time, it's still really nice having access to a guy that knows his craft and follows the league like you do.
Yeah, appreciate it. I don't think I should be in the same sentence as Bardsley, but I'll take it. So thank you.
Well, and we talk about this off air too. That I like having you on because if I can't figure out how to plug my microphone in, like, that's fine, and I'm not standing up a guy like Bardsley or Kurt Hill.
That is true. That is true. I'm just sitting here, twiddling my thumbs, getting ready for it. So yeah, it's all good. So
you have carry a lot of value in that regard as far as the show.
That's true. So I wanted to ask you a question that I got from a fan. And so I'm gonna throw this question to you and see what your thoughts are, because you've been around this team for a while. So the question was, do you think that some of the team's dynamic will change now that Kyle Gustafson is back behind the bench instead of Don Hay? And if so, how do you see that assistant coaches impact the culture in Portland?
Well, it almost has to, and that was something I had thought about earlier on in this episode when you mentioned Don Hay moving on, and I've been peel it back. I've been following this team since the 2005 playoffs, the end of the 04-05 season, and who was behind the bench as assistants at that time was Kyle Gustafson and Brian Pellerin. And now we're back to that, and honestly, I think that Mike Williamson kind of does a little bit of work with the team as well when they're in town. I don't know that for sure, but I've heard that. And so it's kind of like, we have a lot of broadcasters on these shows, and you have, it's musical chairs. There's only so many spots, right? Well, good luck breaking in to, this team as an assistant coach. I mean, you had Danny Flynn, Memorial Cup winner. You had, Don Hay, Memorial Cup winner. You've got these guys, Gustafson has been here for 20 years, and Pellerin was here for a long time, and then, moved on to Tri-Cities and Calgary, or not in that order, with Mike Williamson, and now he's back. And so it's kind of, this team has always had these real veteran heavy assistants that have been, working in this league for a long time. And Gustafson's really interesting too. Being a local boy, done well, and non-traditional background like Bardsley, and they get compared to each other in that regard. But having a year in the NHL, with well, part of it with Travis Green, but that has to be a really interesting perspective too, as far as guys that are currently on the Canucks, right? And so right. When Gustafson takes you aside and says, "Hey, I learned this from Pedersen or whatever. This is what you want to do." That has to get guys' attention. The fact he was just in the NHL, and took that risk. I'm also glad, as far as musical chairs, that it opened up for him after the Canucks went a different direction, because that was a risky move, and he knew it was a risky move, and he took it anyway. We had him on the show, but yeah, so that it has to change the dynamic, and just he's not the same man as Don Hay,
right?
But I would think, hopefully it's going in a positive, because we haven't had the results in the playoffs over the last few years that most fans want. I know that, but yeah, no, it'll be really interesting. And then the guys that were around when Gustafson was here, I'd have to look and see, but there's probably guys that were here, long enough that, before Kyle left and then after he came back. So it'd be interesting to see what they think about his year in the pros and what that did for him. But it has to be advantageous. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. They're two very different people, two very polar opposite kind of personalities and things that they coach, right? Kyle is kind of that offensive-minded, coaches the power play, worked with the power play in Vancouver, coached the power play here in Portland, during his time. And Don was the adamant defensive-minded, let's focus on the PK, let's block shots. And, I can't, if I had $1 for every time, I heard a player say, yeah, I was working with Don on shot blocking last year, it would have been, I would have had at least, a couple dozen dollars, I guess. But, he's just, that was just kind of his mindset, and shooting the foam pucks at guys and talking about the proper form that you want to see on blocking shots. And, Gustafsson has those same kind of, can still kind of do some of that similar style of coaching, I guess, but it's just a very different voice in that locker room. And, like you said, it's, he's got that recent experience, and, he is a little bit of a younger coach, as well. So I don't know how much that resonates with the players or not, but, having him back is, kind of gives some familiarity for Johnston as well. And, I know that Kyle had a lot of options, on what he wanted to do this year. And, I had a chance to talk to him kind of a little bit during the off season a couple times, and being able to just kind of hear how his experience was and kind of some of the things and what it meant for his family. Just to be back here in Portland, I know is kind of a reassuring thing for him. So, hopefully it turns into positive results on the ice.
Yeah, I like that. And, I was already, pumping your tires a little bit too, but, that's one thing that's nice about what you bring to the table as far as these, interactions that you have, and, a little more insider than some of us have. And so it's kind of nice to have that perspective on things that you bring to the show.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. It's something like you mentioned, where you try and build relationships. I think this is my fifth year, I think, covering the team as, credentialed and such. And, you try and build those relationships and talk to the scouts. I think that was a big part of why we maybe didn't run into each other quite as much. During Neely Cup, I was off talking with scouts in between games and interviewing the prospects, and just kind of having some of those off the record conversations, talking to parents, learning the backgrounds of some of these players, where they came from, what interests them, those types of things. So, that's something that I kind of pride myself on, is building those relationships. And, being able to, talk with Mike Coughlin, at one point, kind of a fun little story we had. I was working on a story, and he's like, just come on up and talk to me during one of the games. It's like, during one of the games? Like, you mean when, all this evaluation and stuff is happening? You have time for me? He's like, absolutely, come on up. And, Mike Coughlin's always been very generous with his time, and I asked my questions, and, he asked me a couple too, which is always fun. But you're like, this is the guy who finds these players. Like Luca Cagnoni is a Mike Coughlin find, right? He was a listed player. Like, this was not a guy who got selected in the draft, and this is a type of person who just gives you his time. And I know he's been on this show a couple times, with us, helping recap, drafts and things like that. So you try and build those relationships with the members of the organization, and try and learn what you can. And, sometimes they give you a little nugget, and sometimes they throw you off a scent if they think you're onto something, or they may just kind of point you in the direction, and you kind of keep your research going. But, it's definitely something I've enjoyed, and I'm very appreciative of you of having me on all these times. It's been something. I remember the first time that I was on the show, I don't think I've been more nervous for something in a long time. And so now it just kind of feels like, yep, we're ready to go, and just two guys talking hockey.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, with that, we'll probably, start wrapping a bow on this one. But yeah, and it'll be, we'll have to see what direction that this particular podcast takes in the over the season. I know I come in there have been years I don't record that many episodes, and it kind of gets backburnered. And it's kind of like spring training. Everybody's baseball team is going to be good. Well, this is the year that there's going to be a lot of Pucklandia episodes. But I've said that in the past. But and you talk about developing relationships. Yeah, I mean, I will need to develop relationships with a lot of folk, in order to deliver on the amount of episodes I'd like to do, kind of on a regular basis. So. Because I can have you on every week, but I can't have you on every week. So we'll see how that goes. But you have anything on the cooking as far as over on your site that you're working on that you're excited about, or?
Yeah, I've got a couple things in the hopper. We didn't really get a chance to dive into him too much, but one of the first player profiles that I'll be doing this year is on Diego Buttazzoni, who's got a very interesting story and kind of how he came to the Winterhawks and all that, and kind of a very high profile, a lot of expectations down the line type of player. So looking forward to being able to kind of do the next iteration of my quote unquote introducing series. So working on that. I've got a couple other staff members that I'm working on, trying to be able to kind of put together a couple stories there for PNW Hockey Talk. And, we'll try and get a couple of other kind of unique things this year that we're trying to kind of iron out with the team a little bit right now, and how to make some of that stuff work out. But stay tuned right there. I'm not sure what this weekend's going to entail for me. My whole schedule kind of got thrown around here at the last minute yesterday, but so I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but we'll do the best that we can to try and cover this team like a blanket. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on the show and talk hockey and PNW Hockey Talk as well.
Well, you've been always, like we talked about, you've always been a really valuable part of Pucklandia and what it continues to evolve into, and we'll definitely have to circle back around and have you on a few more times over the course of the season.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Chad. I hope you have a great rest of your night, and thanks everyone for tuning in and being dedicated listeners of the show. So we really do appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Chad.